to our Monday afternoon donor briefing. Thank you so much for joining us today. We're very excited to have the panel that we do talking about youth and youth disrupted. And since this is the end of June, it's usually a pivot from school time to summer program time. We think this is a topic that will be of interest to all of you, and certainly, like everyone else in our community, the youth have been disrupted in ways months ago we could only imagine. Thank you so much for joining us. A little housekeeping before I turn the program over to my colleague, Christina. All participants are on mute. If you have any difficulty with the technology, please type into the chat area and press return, and some member of staff, will help you. We will leave time at the end for questions, and so we encourage you, as you think of a question, please put it in the box that says Q&A, and Christina will facilitate our question and answer portion. All right, I am going to turn the program over to Christina. Thank you.
Thank you, Dottie, and good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for joining us. I'm just going to give a brief update. Some of this you've heard before, as many of you have joined us for all of the donor briefings during our COVID-19 series. But I'll give you a brief update, and then we'll transition to talk with our panel. So we have a couple of slides here. If you see the first slide, you can see that the foundation, in partnership with United Way, raised over $2.7 million in relief funds to over 130 organizations. Those grants have primarily targeted basic needs, particularly food and health, which we've talked about before on these calls. We haven't really been able to pivot significantly from those most basic needs of food and health. And I'm sure our guests today will be able to talk about how their organizations have shifted to address some of those needs. The foundation also accelerated many of our existing grant payments to get money out early to organizations. We also accelerated our annual responsive grant making process by a couple of months, and recently awarded $3 million to in general operating support to a variety of organizations. We also had an extremely successful Great Give this year, given the context with which we're working in, where over $3.6 million was raised, which is more than double than what we raised in the previous year. We've also been working with some organizations who are working with undocumented immigrants and helping them put up their response in a coordinated way to COVID-19. And now more than ever, we are looking at our Census 2020 work that we planned and the nonprofit voter registration work we had planned. I think now it's more important than ever to make sure we're all counted and that everyone is registered to vote. We've also, as you all know, had a series of very well-attended donor briefings on a variety of topics. And we have transitioned or changed some of our capacity building and technical assistance workshops for nonprofits to accommodate and address the current crisis that the sector is facing. So if you look at the next slide, as we are looking ahead, the foundation adopted a new strategic plan at the end of 2019, which also included a new mission and vision. The title of our strategic plan is Opportunity for All, and the plan is centered around equity and inclusion. And while a lot has changed since the end of December when the plan was adopted, the strategies we put in place have never been more important or urgent. So we will be listening more broadly and collaborating more deeply with a diverse group of stakeholders. We're focusing on education and skill building for jobs and growth sectors of the economy. We're also focusing on entrepreneurs, especially women and people of color, and building a more equitable local system of entrepreneurial support. And we will, of course, continue to support the broad spectrum of charitable causes by supporting nonprofits in the region in providing people with the support and the connections they need to build successful lives. We are undertaking this new plan with a deepened commitment to greater equity. And with that said, I think you'll all be getting an email about our new strategic plan. You can see an update about it on our website, and you'll be getting something in the mail about the plan as well. I'd like to transition now into our panel. We are grateful today to have two leaders in the youth serving sector. We're joined by Addys Castillo, who is the Executive Director of Citywide Youth Coalition. Citywide Youth Coalition is a network of over 500 youth serving staff, community stakeholders, and individuals in the New Haven urban region. They work with youth and youth service providers to ensure that the voices of youth are included in important conversations that affect them. And I know Addys is always working to promote and prioritize youth leadership. We are also joined by Henry Fernandez, the Executive Director of LEAP. LEAP is the City of New Haven's largest employer of youth. They train and employ youth to serve other youth through after-school and summer camp programming. And so thank you both very much for joining us and making the time for us today. We appreciate that generosity and are grateful for it. I'm going to start with a couple of general questions, and then we can open it up to the audience for their questions. I'm just going to remind the audience that you can type in questions anytime that a question comes to you. You can type it into the Q&A box, and I will be able to see the questions and facilitate the answering of those questions. If there are too many and we don't get to all of them, then when we send a follow-up email, we're sometimes able to address some of those questions in our follow-up email that goes out recapping the session. So with that said, I'm wondering, maybe Henry, you could start. If you could talk a little bit about how COVID-19 has disrupted and impacted the lives of young people, particularly young people of color. As we all know, COVID-19 has disproportionately affected the Black and Brown community. So I think we're especially interested in hearing about those impacts.
Sure. Well, thanks first to the foundation for having us, and always good to talk alongside Addys, who's an old friend. I'm old; she's a friend. So I guess I would start by saying, obviously there was this major shift to online learning, and I want to state pretty clearly that what we saw is that online learning simply did not work on average for low-income young people of color. And the likelihood that we'll, even though there are plans to go back to in-person schooling in September, the likelihood that that will happen in its entirety is, to me, feels unlikely. And so I think we need to really address this, that we have not figured out whether it's overcoming technology gaps, but primarily it's that teachers have not been, they went off to teachers' colleges and universities. They weren't trained in how to run online learning. Beyond that, I think we see issues in a whole bunch of areas. One is clearly mental health. We're seeing depression at much higher levels. We're seeing real issues with everything that kind of comes from social distancing. So if you think of kind of where young people are at all kind of school-based ages, preschool, all the way through high school, children are building not only academic skills, but also social and emotional skills through all those years. So if you think of the kindergartner who learns how to share, or the teenager who develops an identity separate from their parents, these are key parts of childhood, and they come from being able to engage with other young people. The social distancing, not going to school, not being able to participate in youth programs, not being able to see your friends around the neighborhood, breaking these opportunities really results, these are opportunities for growth, and when we break these, it really harms children. in kind of even more dire situations, when we look at issues of abuse and neglect, if those are happening in the home, they really go unassessed because we identify many of those in schools or through youth programming. When we don't get to the extreme example of something that might be reportable, and we just have difficult home situations, children no longer have easy outlets at school or in the community to be able to kind of escape those situations and have different adults they can rely on. Also, obviously, big disruptions in food, income, rent. I think many of us have been working very hard on those issues. We're seeing real educational disruption at all levels, so beyond issues with regard to online learning, kids figuring out choosing colleges is severely disrupted. For younger children, making transitions between schools, we see real disruption. And then in employment, I mean, it was mentioned that we're, if not the largest, one of the largest employers of teens and young adults in the city. And the unemployment rate for that population has skyrocketed. And, and all that comes with that, including that young people's income is often an important part of helping to lift families out of intense poverty, particularly when we talk about Latino and African American teens. So I think there's been disruptions really all across the board in the lives of young people.
Thank you, Henry. Addys, do you want to talk a little bit about how your view of how, add to Henry's comments about how youth have been disrupted and impacted by COVID-19?
Sure. The only thing I would add to that is that a lot of our young people who have siblings, for instance, have been taking on a lot of childcare responsibility along with that. And even when we're talking about the difficulty of doing school, imagine having multiple children in the house with one laptop and having to figure out whose schoolwork is more important than whom. So that becomes a juggle. Outside of that, what I have also experienced is that this has been really difficult in maintaining young people to be motivated towards looking at a positive outlook for the future. And I'm speaking from the young people who I work with, and also speaking, on behalf of young people who I come across at home. And I can tell you, for the young men who I come across on an often basis, the idea of not being able to engage socially, not in sports, not in work, not in school, is really doing a number as far as not keeping folks more or less contemplating if school's a real good fit for them in the future, or maybe I should be doing something, else. If anything, folks are having a lot of very, very critical conversations about what the future looks like. Not everything is at a standstill.
And how are you seeing youth actually, how are they coping with all of this?
Good one. So what I have recognized as for us, our work at Citywide has almost tripled, because now staff has almost turned into case managers, where they're constantly reaching out to young people, speaking to what Henry was saying, almost doing wellness checks often 2 to 3 times a week. Having much longer conversations, whether it's through FaceTime chat or on Zoom or Google Hangouts. Young people kind of really looking for a way to connect and feeling rather depressed. And when we start talking about depression, what comes along with that is substance use, or finding other ways to self-medicate, whether it's overeating, whether it is doing dangerous things like being out and about, or even engaging with whomever you can actually come in contact with. Those are things that have been brought to the forefront as a result of the pandemic. Especially now that it's getting warmer, more folks are itching to be out and about. So it's almost inevitable that people are having sleepovers and exposing themselves to even more opportunities to get sick.
Yeah.
Right. So you bring up a good point, and which actually leads to my next question for both of you, is how have your organizations had to adapt, which you started talking about a little bit, Addys, in providing more case management. How have your organizations had to adapt to the needs of youth? But also, what have you had to do? Your organizations are under a certain burden, sometimes financial burden as a result of COVID-19, which is actually impacting your organizations, your revenues, your ability to deliver services. So kind of a two-part question. How is your organization adapted to meet the needs of youth? And what are some of the burdens that your organization and its infrastructure are facing in trying to adapt to this? Henry, do you want to go first?
No, I started first. Go ahead, Addys.
Thank you. I would say, for starters, we actually moved home out of the office almost a week before the official quarantine went into effect. Only just prepping as a result of it, just okay, if it's not safe to be in certain places and our office is small, it's not a good idea for us to be in here either. So we were able to transition to online, that online platform rather smoothly. But what we have noticed is that the monies that we would normally be using to support services, we are now looking to use to support relief for young people in the community. So it's been like almost a double-edged sword. The good part being that we've been able to be keenly focused on the needs of our young people and the community at large, and being able to make connections not only with the folks who are supposed to be meeting those needs in the system, but also identifying the opportunities for us to advocate for things to just be made automatic. One of the things that we were lucky and able to do was, thanks to Henry, we were able to coordinate a weekly conversation amongst all of the youth serving providers. And in those conversations, we started to unpack the things that we were noticing across the board. And the first thing that came to mind with automatically, we knew that computers were going to be an issue. Technology in general is one of the issues that came up. But the biggest capacity issue wasn't the computer, it was Wi-Fi. The fact that everybody doesn't have Wi-Fi, and the fact that it's considered a luxury. So if you don't have Wi-Fi, you're not able to go to school. And I think we've had lots of conversations about how the number of young people who haven't even checked in to school since the pandemic had started. So as far as capacity-wise, we were able to adjust to an online platform, but instead of being face-to-face, it feels like our work has again tripled because we're spending much more time doing outreach and having conversations and being strategic. And even now, as we gear up to do summer work, it feels like our day is never an 8-hour day. It's more like a 12-hour day. I have yet to have a day where I don't work, from 8 a.m. to 8 p.m. because it's constantly something happening. So it's exhausting. That's the one thing that there's no capacity you can build around that. And then taking time off is almost impossible given the height of the tension that's happening all around us now.
Yeah, I would agree absolutely with everything Addys said. I mean, we made a commitment at LEAP, early on to do 4 things as I think back. One, we wanted to continue to serve children and families, which meant that we were going to have to build virtual programming. We'd been running for a quarter of a century under one model, and we were going to have to change that. Then, we run programs for over 1,000 children, but we're also, we also employ a lot of young people, and we felt, given kind of the economic stresses, that it was important that as we rebuilt programming, that we did not lay anybody off, that we continue to employ young people. So right now, we have over 100 young people that are on payroll for us. We also wanted to be a source of information for our families, so we adopted some new technologies. We now have a blast text messaging service, which allows us to immediately communicate with all families. We rebuilt our website so that it's a source of information. All of our applications are now online forms. We collect everything online. As Addys mentioned, it was important to us as well that we build not only LEAP for this moment, but also that we support our brother and sister colleague youth agencies. And so we've done some fundraising jointly, particularly around PPE. We've also run these weekly meetings of all the youth agencies in town. We host that. So it was important that we think of our work differently, and we sat down and did some real strategizing in the first week or two to build out these pieces. On the on the virtual programming side, we really struggled there. And by struggled, I mean, I think we've done as much as anybody or more than a lot of organizations, just because we bring, you know, a lot of capacity in that space. So we've had 2,025 virtual sessions with children. That's probably about a third of the contact that we would normally have had with children outside, you know, in a face-to-face setting. We've, for the first time ever, engaged in distributing food, rent relief, computers. So we've distributed 66 computers at this point, over $35,000 in rent and food support. We've had to, you know, make very difficult decisions around summer programs. So we're actually running a hybrid in-person and virtual summer program. And it took us a lot to get there, and we've had to build a lot of capacity. But even with that, we're shifting our summer program from serving over 600 children to just over 300 children. That'll, you know, include all of our programming will be outdoors. Everyone, children and staff, will be in masks. We're COVID testing, you know, all of our counselors, all of our staff on a weekly basis. We're doing temperature checks. We're running for 4 hours every day instead of 8. And children are in the program in person for 1 week, and then we go virtual for 1 week. Normally there'd be 100 kids at a site. Now we're doing 30 kids at a site. We put all that together, we're spending close to, or actually just over $100,000 in program modifications. And you know, I came to this session just having left our testing 120 employees, giving COVID tests to 120 employees. As I said, something that we're doing weekly. And I think that to your question about burdens, the truth is that this is all very expensive and difficult for us. And there are really only a couple of programs in New Haven that you know, that have the staffing and the resources that we're able to bring to bear on this, and it is a significant struggle for us. We're starting our program 2 weeks later than normal this summer, where we recognize that based on testing, based on what we see in the field, we could stop after a few days or after a couple of weeks. You know, it's probably the hardest choice I've had to make as an executive director, and I've made it with my team and with my board. You know, these are, but when we look at the issues of mental health and we look at the issues of child safety, we surveyed all of our parents, and 70% of parents wanted in-person programming. Similar percentage of parents said that their kids would be outside playing this summer, whether there was in-person programming or not. But a substantial number of parents only wanted virtual programming, about 30%. So this is a real balancing act. I think if it wasn't the summer, I mean, we weren't able to run all of our programs outside, I don't see how it would be possible.
So Henry, you said that you shifted from serving over 600 kids in the summer to 300. Is that shift because that's all you can do given the current circumstances and restrictions and how you've redesigned your program, or that's all the demand is calling for, everyone else wants to stay out of in-person programming?
Yeah, I mean, we have some built-in restrictions. We're a neighborhood-based program, so we work in individual neighborhoods. If we opened it up citywide, there'd certainly be a very large demand from what we see. But for us, it wasn't about the number of kids we could serve. It was about the number of kids we could serve safely. And so normally we would have 100 kids at a site on a given week. So a site for us would be like a school building. We're going to have 30 kids at that site with no reduction in staff numbers. So normally 2 counselors would work with 10 kids. They'll work with 6 kids. Normally there'd be 100 kids at the site. There'll be 30 kids at the site. It's really based on design. That's substantially lower than what the state requires, but it's where we felt we could manage safely.
Now, is your sense, this is not just a question for LEAP, but I know you speak more broadly with all of the youth serving organizations. Is it your sense that because now essentially you all have to operate to be safe with the same or more staff and serving fewer youth, are there youth being left out of programming or not able to access programming and want to because of limitations?
Yeah, I mean, Addys mentioned this earlier. There are about 3,000 children, is my understanding, that the New Haven that never plugged in to the New Haven online programming. This is out of a district of about 20,000 kids. There are thousands and thousands of kids who are not plugged in at this point anywhere. I mean, I think we can't underestimate the difficulty that young people are having, and but also that the agencies that reach them. We've all built these models over years and years, and we've been asked to create entirely new models with, and so we're all using Zoom, right? Like that's kind of, that's what we know, right? Okay, we're using Zoom. But what are the best ways to engage children who need therapy, virtually? What are the best ways to, when we do large group meetings, so we'll have a group meeting with young people. So we did a graduation DJ Zoom event, right? What you'll see, which is really interesting, right, is that, and I'd be interested if Addys sees this as well, is, if we have 80, 100 young people on a Zoom event, 80% of them won't show their face. Right? There are things, and there are things that we don't understand about how they use these technologies, and the risks that they understand in the technologies, and the pain that they feel that they don't want to share. I don't, if you put most of us in a community center, in a community space, we're one-on-one with a kid, we know how to have that conversation. This is completely different, completely new. And I think we're learning, but there are no classes in social work school or in teachers education programs that talk about how you engage young people in this scenario.
Addys, how about Citywide Youth Coalition? How are you? How have you adapted your programming? How much in-person versus virtual work are you doing?
All virtual.
All virtual?
All virtual. We just finished, tomorrow we end our queer camp. Queer camp is, we've been doing it now, this is our third year. It was a 7-day long program, full day, where young queer Black and brown youth from across the state got together to learn their history and to not only fellowship, but start building an agenda around the things that they need from their communities in order to feel safe. And as a result of COVID, and my team, they decided to just do it all virtually. Instead of doing it a full day, they switched it to a 3 to 4 hour day. And it was done from the beginning of June up until tomorrow's the last day. And what they did was they created care kits for young people. They mailed out all the things that they would have otherwise gotten during programming. The monies that we would have spent on food, each young person that participates in the program got a $350 stipend for participating. And all of it is really to keep them engaged, because to Henry's credit, the difficulty that we're having is there's things that we don't see, because you're right. A lot of stuff that we hear about, but we don't necessarily see. We don't know what people's technology, equipment looks like. But also some people have some difficult home lives that they're managing. In particular, I think about, when I think of queer camp in particular, I think about how many kids are now forced to be at home and can't be themselves at home. They can't show up as they do anywhere else because their parents don't accept them as they are. So now they have to be home for the next 3 to 4 months, or whoever knows how long, having to struggle with not being accepted and can actually be liberated in their own homes. So creating a space where young people feel comfortable sharing what that experience is like has been essential for us. So we've been doing everything through Zoom in very small groups, but we on average have 2 to 3 group meetings online. And that's separate from folks actually doing the one-on-one conversations through FaceTime. And then for the summer, as a result of, let's be honest, as a result of all of the work that Black Lives Matter was doing prior to this, and now with the times that we're living in, our young people are taking chances to actually be out and about demonstrating, full-fledged in safety gear and what have you, but they're well rested and they're paying attention and they're like, no more of this. So as a result of that, we're still gonna do our programming online, but we will be making room for us to gather together with social distancing and PPE in play, maybe every other week, just for once a week. Also maintaining, in the same concern as Henry lifted up, the idea of making sure that our young people are safe and well wherever they're staying. We got some young people that are in New Haven and some people who actually live in the Valley. And for our young people who live in the Valley, they're completely disconnected to what's going on down here. They can't attend summer program. They haven't been able to participate in any of the traditional activities that they would have otherwise in their senior year. And as a result, it's been really critical for us to be available, whether that be sending money, sending care packages, things that young people need, but making ourselves available in a way that we've never made ourselves available before. So we've been shape-shifting to actually meet the needs of young people. And to be honest, it's been a blessing to be able to do it and to have the resources available to do it. The monies that we already had for programming have just been shifted to support the young needs of kids. In fact, we, much like Henry, we gave out computers and we did some of that work, but we are gonna make good with the money we have been able to fundraise, be launching a COVID relief fund that's accessible to just young people under 25 for up to about $200. So anyone in the city who lives in the city who's in need of funds, we will be making those available throughout the summer until we run out of money.
Yeah, maybe I could follow up on that quickly, Christina. I mean, I think what we've seen from donors, which has been really helpful, has been an investment in this kind of emergency relief. And that's been really helpful. And we have one donor who's been great about supporting acquisition of PPE. But programming still has to operate. And I think that that we have, we've seen some donors kind of shift into this emergency need space and not necessarily continue to support the kind of ongoing work. And that's important now. It'll be important in the fall as well. So it's really important now because of summer programming, but in the fall, not just for LEAP, because we actually raised our rates earlier than this, but for most youth organizations in the city, particularly those that employ high school students, they're paying minimum wage. And so they're all going to see $1 increase in that minimum wage in the fall. And so that will come at a time when donors are often shifting funds into emergency relief, asking organizations to engage in emergency relief, which is absolutely needed. I certainly support it, but you're going to see this increase in the minimum wage, which will mean that organizations need resources to be able to pay that increase, whether they're paying the minimum wage or they're paying $1 over the minimum wage. We should expect that for all organizations. And I think donors supporting general operating support is really important at this moment.
Thank you, Henry. We were actually, I'm glad you brought up the issue of minimum wage because I actually had forgotten about that, but it is something that we were concerned about pre-COVID-19 in terms of the impact on the sector. And now, as you mentioned, it's even more so a concern as people have shifted their support to emergency relief. And I echo your comments around the importance of general operating support, especially now. Addys, you mentioned Black Lives Matter, and I actually wanted to ask you, how how you think the trauma or the experience of COVID-19 has impacted or maybe helped catalyze youth-led organizing efforts around Black Lives Matter. If you can talk about that a little bit. I was looking at your website earlier and I noticed you have a really good timeline on your website of the of what has happened over the summer this far in terms of igniting that some of those protests.
So I think what we are seeing is a perfect storm. We had some time off. As a result of having some time off, we have been able to have much more deeper conversation. And in these deeper conversations, we've been unpacking the things that we're seeing. Young people have an analysis when it comes to the systems that they're operating under. And as a result of that analysis, they are not even, I wouldn't even say they're emboldened. They are really operating from a place of being tired of not only just being home, but tired of now only being under the gun, no matter what the situation is. So that has created an atmosphere for revolution, if you will. So young people all across the country, this is not just a New Haven specific thing, this is all over. As a matter of fact, I won't even say the world, come to think of it, because they're protesting everywhere. Young people have a fearlessness that, you know, sometimes adults kind of forget about. We become slaves to the systems we serve. We have mortgages, we have bills to pay. So we are a little more vested and we might get upset, but we're still gonna go to work. But imagine young people lost their jobs. Young people can't go to school right now. They can't even go out in public without being, you know, criticized for not wearing a face mask. So if anything, what has happened is young people have taken all of this energy and all of this information that they are, you know, being presented with, and they are doing something about it. And they're being unapologetic. This whole movement to defund the police in the city of New Haven came as a result of that. Young people have already been having a conversation about feeling unsafe and harassed by the well-to-do police officers that may not know it, that sometimes their presence is intimidating by virtue of that blue uniform and the virtue of the fact that you carry a gun. And that has, you know, it becomes more symbolic than anything else. And as a result of what happened to George Floyd and Breonna Taylor and what has been happening to us for centuries, young people are no longer interested in, they're not gonna take our cognitive dissonance any longer. They're gonna take matters into their own hands. And what you're seeing right now is an activation on like anything I think any of us really anticipated. We staged a rally on June 5th, and we anticipated maybe 500. We didn't anticipate everybody was gonna show up so ready for this conversation. And as such, now our work goes into overdrive. Because now that people are activated, they wanna know, what do we do now? So even if I'm not working, even if I'm not in a summer program, what can I do to be involved? What can I do to not go back to sleep? Because that's usually what happens. And that's really what I find has been happening in the conversation I'm having with people in positions of power. They're really hoping that people will go back to sleep at some point. But it's really hard to go back to sleep when we can't breathe. And we can't breathe because we're wearing masks all the time. It's hard to wear a mask all day long and breathe through that. We can't breathe because we still are being treated like second-class citizens. And young people are hip to the game. They got hip to the game in 2016, and in 2020 is a whole new level of consciousness. So if anything, this is an opportunity for us to really get ourselves in formation, if you will, for us to have a better understanding of what the issues are. And one of the things that I've loved about this time during the pandemic has been that the youth service providers are talking, but having very different conversations. Because while some people are ready to go into programming, some of us have been reluctant to even have the conversation because we understand the numbers. And that despite the fact that the pandemic is happening in the US, it has been Black and brown bodies who have been the designated dyers in this particular pandemic, right? And it's something we can't ignore, especially if we're opening services. I'd be interested in knowing what other towns that don't have as many Black and brown children are holding actual in-person camps. Because we're gonna find that more of those places are not doing it and electing to do everything virtual, even pay their employees virtually, because they don't wanna take a risk. And yet in our communities, our parents are dying for their camps to open because they gotta go back to work. They're running out of resources for their young people, and they're not even equipped. They don't have the capacity to deal with their children with education, household needs, social emotional needs, without even taking care of themselves, first. I often think about what they tell us when we get on a plane, right? You know, in case of any emergency, you got to put on the mask first before you can help somebody out. And while we're talking about children, we're not talking about how parents are faring in this middle of this crisis. So it's kind of like a delicate balance of both. And as a result of what's going on, people are not only emboldened, but they're taking action. And as such, we are working around the clock as a result of it. So we're not taking this for granted in any way, shape, or form. If anything, we're looking for opportunities to use this for us to actually work beyond just providing services and look at what are the policy issues that are in play that are keeping the situation or exacerbating it for what it is. We've identified one of those being that Wi-Fi needs to be something that is automatic. It's a basic need for all households. It shouldn't be something that only I can afford if I have cable. That should be something that's available for everyone. The fact that even in Bridgeport, kids gotta go to McDonald's and go sit outside or go follow a school bus that might have some Wi-Fi, that's despicable. And imagine that for the city of New Haven when we have a conglomerate like the Yale University who has a multi-billion-dollar endowment, and our young people don't have enough laptops and iPads to actually do work. So all of that is the perfect storm for what's happening right now and why nobody is going home. The streets are going to remain full of young people. In fact, there's another protest happening on Saturday, July 4th, in New London, and young people are going to be in the streets, and I'll be there with them.
Thank you, Addys. Henry, did you want to make any comments around the youth-led organizing work, particularly around Black Lives Matter?
Sure. Well, I'm going to largely defer to Addys on this one because I think that Citywide's leadership in this space, I mean, you know, we encouraged our young people to participate in Citywide's events and Citywide Youth Coalition's events. And, you know, we've had large group discussions with, you know, and bringing in alumni, you know, with our high school and college students to kind of talk through understanding their work in the context of racial justice. You know, and I think I do want to note that LEAP's work is done through a racial justice and community building lens. And you know, we have a senior staff that's majority Black and Latino. Our counselors are overwhelmingly people of color and primarily African American. And so when we think of our community of young people, our job is to develop young leaders and to help them see their power early on, to really create the expectation that they can make change and that they can lead. And equally important, that they can see people that look like them leading an organization, making decisions in these kind of difficult times. It also goes to, you know, things like the books that we choose to read, that they can understand the world that they live in because of those books and what authors we choose and subjects we cover, making sure that our work is not just to help kids read, but to center the struggle for civil rights and for liberation. And I'm saying all that because the change I'd like to see over time is that all of our youth agencies and the work that we do at LEAP and any of the other organizations is done with a commitment to racial justice. And so maybe finally I'd say on this that I think we've learned a lot at LEAP, a lot about what our sister agencies are doing, a lot about what more we could be doing, and a lot about how we can be more candid at LEAP about how an understanding of race is central to what we do. That is, we have a racial justice analysis. It's why we're organized the way we are. It's why we work in the communities we work in. It's why we deliver services the way we deliver them. But often we kind of are seen and just as a youth agency. I think folks generally think we do good work with children, but there are reasons that we do it the way that we do it. There's reasons that we have such a great track record of developing young leaders of color who go on to do great work, inside LEAP and elsewhere. And I think one of the things that we've started to think about is bringing that more to the forefront, being even clearer about this is why we do things the way that we do.
Christina, I'm a LEAPer.
Thanks, Henry. I
That's true.
know.
Addys
Me for life.
is
Since
was a young leader we
1992.
developed a few years back. Yes.
So there's some questions in the Q&A. I'm just going to grab some of these questions from the audience. One is about the computer and Wi-Fi issues. Have you solved the computer and Wi-Fi access problems? If not, what is needed? And are New Haven teachers or schools figuring out how to teach next year, especially if students have to stay at home?
I can take a first crack at this, Addis, if you want to add
Okay.
anything. So Addis and myself and some other folks, we put together actually a policy statement from the youth agencies in the city that now we're just starting to have conversations with legislators about, which is saying that, that this problem needs to be solved, that there need to be negotiations with the big internet providers who have huge contracts with the state, for instance, and to make sure Wi-Fi is available, that the computers that were given out by school districts, all the big city school districts in the state gave out their computers, that children should be able to keep those, and not have to return them in the fall, because what we've really seen is that there was always a problem. Kids were not, low-income children of color were not able to have a computer at home in order to do their homework, in order to write an essay, that sort of thing. Those are all requirements for children across New Haven public schools, that they go home and write essays, that they do research online at home. And so this gap that's been exposed by COVID-19, it pre-existed COVID-19, and it made it much, much harder for low-income children of color to participate in their own education in the way that education actually works. So children, whether they have a computer or not at home, are obligated to use Google Classroom in the New Haven public schools. And the research inside and outside New Haven indicates that a lot of kids are doing that through parents' cell phones, for instance, which is not a particularly effective way to write an essay. So this gap has not been solved, and a lot of work needs to be done on it. And I think the other thing that we've learned is that when we actually, so there's both, even if we get a vaccine, and everything's better, we need computers in children's homes, and we need Wi-Fi access in every child's home. That's how education works today. But beyond that, school districts should be reimbursed for allowing those computers to go home with kids and to stay at the children's homes. But beyond that, if, as most of us think, we are going to wind up at some point in the fall or the winter with a recurrence of the illness, then at scale, and that total in-person programming is not going to work. What we've learned as well is that having one computer in a home with 4 children doesn't work. Right? That if every child has 2 hours of homework and mom has to, be doing mom or dad has to be doing some of their work on the computer as well. Suddenly, you've got a kid getting home at 3 o'clock, and just all the children doing their homework takes you to midnight or 11 p.m. And, so you really need, and what the superintendent has been good about saying, is that there needs to be one-to-one access. Children, every child needs to have access to a computer, both in school and at home, and that's really the way education works now. We need to be honest about that. We need to figure out how to fund it, and make sure that poor families have equal access to the way education is actually happening now. Thank
you. There's a question in the chat about the revenue streams of your organizations and how, on youth serving organizations in general, how your revenue streams have been impacted by the increased costs you have to incur around PPE and maybe more staffing or revising your program. And I'm also interested in the PPE question because, our COVID fund our COVID relief fund gave out a lot of grants. A lot of those grants were to support PPE, but we know that that is disposable. And we know we're hearing what the cost is from organizations. So how do you continue to generate the revenue you need for PPE, knowing you're going to continue to need it? And are you having issues sourcing it? If you could talk a little bit about that.
So we got lucky. One of our funders, the Memorial Fund, was able to provide us. They asked us ahead of time how many staff do we have and we would need PPE. So we put in a request, but because we're not going to be doing any of our programming face-to-face, we are not really incurring that cost. We did take the face masks. We have them at the office, and we make sure that we distribute it to our staff members and our fellows who are high school students who are employed, just so that they have what they need in order for us to get together from time to time. And anytime that we will get together, we will use that stuff. Plus, also, we partnered up with LEAP to get some access to funding through the Carolyn Foundation so that we can purchase more PPE. I'm sure that it's expensive, but I've been grateful that other partners have taken lead to get access to that. So I don't even really know what the actual cost is for the moment. However, I will say that when we were looking to do a couple of things face-to-face, which include an Undoing Racism workshop in August, we're recognizing how expensive it's going to be as a result of having to do it outside and making sure that everybody's spaced out. Just the overall reduction of numbers in any of the events that we're doing means that then the cost per person skyrockets. So it's a delicate balance. I'm grateful that I have funders who have been very understanding of that. And instead of waiting for us to ask for help, they have actually volunteered to help us first. So that has been a godsend at this moment. So I'm really hoping that continues to be the trend.
That's great, Addys. I'm glad to hear that. Henry?
The only thing I would add to what Addys said, I think, the Carolyn Foundation has been absolutely wonderful in this space, and really appreciate them for that. Would be, I think we're all the organizations that rely in some way or another on state funding are likely to just take a beating. For us, that's several $100,000. And it's been going down, but I think the state revenues are just going to be really problematic when, the July 15th is when everybody has to pay, their taxes, and move from April 15th. And so I think when that happens, it's likely that we'll see some significant cuts in revenue to the state. Their solution, hopefully, would be to address that by bonding. I think, a once a century pandemic would be a time to go into bonding and use debt, but that's probably somewhat unlikely. And so I expect that from a revenue stream perspective, organizations that rely on state funding are likely to face very significant problems over the coming 6 months to a year.
So I have one final question for each of you, and thank you again for your time. But given how heavy the subject matter is and how troubling these times are, I like to end these sessions by asking what gives you hope. I can imagine that the two of you get to work with young people, so I'm sure you have great answers to that question. So what gives you hope? What keeps you going? Addys?
The fearlessness and the life and energy that I get from working from unapologetically bold young people. It gives me not only hope, it energizes me to keep doing the work I'm doing and not feeling burned out, even when the day gets longer. And again, I don't even know what day of the week it is ever anymore. It's just yesterday, today, tomorrow, right? But no, I'm really not only impressed, I feel like my soul is being nurtured and is being fed by seeing how many young people are stepping into their power. Like that alone gives me hope for the future.
Thank you, Addys. Henry?
I would certainly agree with all that. I would say, I mentioned, that we had 120 folks, primarily young folks, being, getting COVID-19 tests today, and just seeing them and their energy and how excited they were none of them were excited to have, a giant Q-tip stuck up their nose, but they're excited to see each other, to be back, working. They're all wearing masks, all trying to social distance, but I think that's one of the hardest things to get teenagers to do. It's not wearing the mask, it's the social distancing that's hard for young people. Just the pride that they have in doing the work, the joy that they have in being around each other. It was just like, I spend a lot of time right now figuring out where you can get disinfectant wipes, right? And I spent a lot of time trying to figure out where you can get alcohol gel, and because we're operating outside, we've got several dozen tents now that we're the proud owners of. And just seeing young people actually getting to be young people really was a huge weight off my shoulders, and made me feel really good, and made it clear to me why we're doing what we're doing, and I look forward to that. I mean, it's going to be the most difficult summer that I think we've ever had working as LEAP, and we've had difficult summers. We were I've been there long enough that I remember when, we had, real threats to safety and things like that around, the nature of working intensely in public housing, for instance. But this is dangerous or difficult, I guess, in a different way, because unlike most of the work that we do with young people, the trauma that they're experiencing now, all of us are experiencing too, right? I mean, that's very unique, right? That that this is a time when everything that they're facing, we're facing too, or at least the kind of underlying causes are hitting all of us. So, just seeing their energy, seeing their joy, seeing their futures, I think makes all this work worthwhile. And so thank you for putting this conversation together, and thanks to everybody for joining it. And I wish we had more time to answer everybody's questions, but and I guess the last thing I would say is just really, really proud of how all the youth agencies who, historically, going back, 25, it's been 25 years since the youth agencies, met on any kind of regular basis. And now to be meeting all the time, talking about, as Addys pointed out, not just, very specific issues like how are you going to run virtual programming, or how can you get, a PPP loan from the CARES Act, but also talking about these issues that underlie all of this, like talking about racial justice, talking about educational equity, talking about access to technology. That brings me a lot of energy too, that this is a city that ultimately, time and again, wants to try to find the solution to the bigger problems. We may not always get there, but I found a fearlessness in New Haven, people willing to talk about what really underlies the problems that our young people face.
Well, thank you both. And we have one of the donors in the chat said, knowing that the two of you are working as well as others gives them hope. So thank you both again very much. And I'm going to transition it back to Dottie to close us out. Dottie? Oh, maybe we lost Dottie, or she's on mute. I do want to ask you, you'll all be getting an evaluation form at the close of this session. Please make sure to complete that form for us. It helps inform us on how we're doing and what other topics you want to hear about. And you will get a follow-up email from this session that will summarize what we heard and what we learned and propose some action steps and other resources. So thank you all again for your time today. And thank you, Addys and Henry. Have a great day.
Thank you so much.
Thanks, Dottie.